Well, thank you everybody for joining in for our latest episode of Continence Chat. I know my colleague Susie and I are really thrilled to bring back for a second time Tracy Perkins. For people that may have watched our prior episode, Tracy is an author of the book Dementia Home Care, and she had so many practical tips for people that were caring for loved ones in their home. She's been a caregiver multiple times that we thought best to bring her back on, because I do believe her heart and her head are in such the great place to help others, which is part of her mission. So Tracy, without further ado, to kind of sort of just give if you wouldn't mind, if you could share your background a little bit for people that maybe didn't see the first episode, and a little bit about how the book came to be.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me back. I am so honored to be here. And for everybody that didn't see this, I am Tracy Cram Perkins. I am a 4-time dementia caregiving survivor. I cared for my mother, father, and an uncle. Everyone had different dementia, and so every experience was different. They also had additional health issues, so I had to learn a whole bunch of different things. And the reason I wrote the book is because when we rescued my father from the system. So after my mom passed, he was living on his own. He had diabetes, and we were doing wellness checks with him. And what ended up happening is that one night when my sister had her turn to look in on him after work, she found him unconscious on the floor of his living room. And we called 911. When he got to the hospital, he came to a week later from a diabetic coma and was diagnosed with moderate Alzheimer's disease. And because they didn't believe that we would take him to our home, but we would do what most people do, which is take him and put them back in their home, and they're back in the hospital 3 days later, they put him into the system. And my father didn't feel like he had dementia, and he didn't believe that he should be treated the way he was being treated. He also, all he wanted to do was go for a walk, because he really was congenial. He just wanted to go for a walk, and everybody said no because he had dementia. So he would just wait till their back was turned, and he would sneak out. And he was really good at it. But unfortunately, we didn't understand how that worked. So we got really upset with the people that were losing him, not understanding how this worked, how he could get out. And he was in a group home, the very first one. So we learned our lesson, but with the first place, we were not kind because we didn't understand how they were losing him. And to give you a little background, there were 6 beds. There were 2 staff members. My father was the only ambulatory person. So they kept putting it, after his first couple of wandering episodes, they put him on a medication that was supposed to make him behave. He had an hallucination, and he threatened to kill his roommate. And so they sent him to a geriatric psych ward, and he stayed there for 3 days. But because we did have such a headbutting experience with the staff, and it was our fault. We didn't understand what we were doing or asking of them. Now we do. But at the time, they wouldn't tell us where he went. So my whole family got together, and we had to call every hospital for 3 counties till we found him. And we found him 1 county to the north. So he ended up in the system for 4.5 more months. And every time he hit his 5th escape, he would be ejected and sent to the next one. And I also, and this is the big part of it, I didn't have power of attorney at the time, because my younger sister and I agreed to split care for the parents, not understanding the ramifications of what we did, because we didn't consult an attorney when we had them fill out the power of attorney. We just filled out the form online, and voila, power of attorney after it was notarized. So it took us that also amount of time to get power of attorney. I didn't ask for conservatorship. I just wanted power of attorney at the time. And so he was at the most secure facility in our area, and he escaped again. The first 3 times, my father was very charming. He was in a rehab facility that also had memory care, and so he would see the ladies coming in to visit their husbands, and he would, as they were leaving, he would offer to escort them to their car because it was a little sketch in the neighborhood. And so they would say yes, and he'd walk them to the car, made sure they were safe. He'd wave them goodbye, and then he'd go for his walk. And the staff didn't catch on for the first 3 times. And they were, of course, it's really hard for them because they have to self-report every time somebody escapes. So they got to number 4, and they put a wristband on him. My dad's roommate then went to physical therapy that morning, and my dad was, even though he's in moderate Alzheimer's disease, he still had the skills from his job. And he noticed that the plate glass window was mounted incorrectly in his room. And so what ended up happening is he waited till his roommate was gone, closed the door partially, but not all the way so that people could see in, but not see what he was doing. And he unscrewed the window, lifted it out, climbed out in his pajamas and slippers, put it back in, and screwed it back in correctly. So it was mounted correctly. So they fixed a problem they didn't know they had. And then he went for his walk. And they, of course, they didn't find him. When they got back, they didn't. They were looked everywhere and couldn't find him. And there's no cameras pointed at patient windows. So, uh, so of course, they found him when 911 started getting calls that he had walked 5 miles down the road to heading towards the on-ramp for I-5. So he was heading towards I-5. He was crossing 6 lanes of traffic, which, because there was a Pacific Highway South, against the light. And everyone, of course, was calling and saying, there's an elderly gentleman in pajamas and slippers crossing against the light. So imagine this. He's a 77-year-old man. He made it 5 miles in an hour and a half. The man was booking because he was really determined to go for this walk. So here's where we caught our break, though. The sheriff that was dispatched to pick him up ended up having had a family member with dementia. So instead of, strong arming my dad, he just walked up to me. He goes, "You look really tired," because at this point he's sitting on the guardrail going into the freeway entrance. And my dad said, yes, he was. And then he said, would you like a ride home? And my dad said, I would really appreciate that. And so then he said, have you been in the police car before? My dad said, no. He goes, well, just hop in. I'll show you all around. I'll explain all the parts as we go back. And so we drove him back, and it was my dad had a great time. So we're all standing there waiting for him when he arrives. And the social worker asked him, how did you get out? And he was very happy to tell them, because it was the first time they treated him like a human being. So that when we finally got him freed from this facility and to our own house, that was the thing he asked me. He goes, Tracy, I have Alzheimer's disease and not the plague. What does it take to be treated like a human being? And that's why I wrote the book.
Wow. Yeah, that is, I read I'm not sure if it was your acknowledgement or your dedication, but I reread that and saw that quote in there. And then I also have to ask Tracy, because I also read that someone secretly loves strawberry ice cream. Was that your dad as well?
That was my dad. Yes. He would make sure we bought Neapolitan ice cream, and he loved it so much we had to buy the 5-gallon containers from Baskin and Robbins.
Okay. Wow. Do you think, I'm just curious as I'm listening to you share that story, and then I know Susie and I and our teammates spend a lot of time in memory care communities. How every story is unique, right? So your dad's is unique, but how common do you think it is for residents that are in a community with moderate stage dementia to want to walk and wander? I know we hear the terminology a lot, right? Wander management services that are available, but would you say is your dad's, everybody's unique story, so I know his is unique, but is it common, do you think, with that type of demographic of people that have moderate stage that are anxious to get out and walk?
Yes, because the Alzheimer's Association actually has the statistic on their website that 6 in 10 people with Alzheimer's disease will wander. So that's 60% of the people with Alzheimer's disease. So if you don't have a distraction technique and you don't have something to redirect them or prevent them from leaving, then they will be very, very determined to go once their mind tells them, I need to go to work, I need to go home, I need to go take care of whatever the thing is that they think they need to take care of at that moment, or they just want to get out because they're restless. They're going to be very determined without you getting to them first and redirecting them. So I made sure that I teach people how to have things in place in your home to prevent that from happening. So one of the things that we did by accident was using black doormats, because a black looks like a hole. It's perceived as a hole, and so is navy blue and dark brown. So using a black doormat, the first time I had it was I just didn't want the guys tracking in mud from the garden. And so my husband and my father were outside gardening, and I put the mats down because it was, it's fall and I was getting, muddy, and they I asked them just to wipe their feet, and my husband wiped his feet and walked in, and my dad looked down, didn't say a word, just turned around and walked in through a different door.
Wow.
And so I had to research that to find out that black was a hole. That also meant that if you have black bath mats, that might be another reason why they might not want to bathe. So it's just learning about how colors are used. Also, finding out where they are in their timeline. We had an incident where my dad told us he wanted to go home. I showed him his memory book and asked him to start picking out himself in the picture, and he picked himself out in high school. So he's about 16 years old. Well, his mother was very, very strict, and it was getting dark outside, and he realized he should be at home. And so he said he had to go home. And so when I found out that he was in the picture around 16, 17 years old, I said, his name is Eldon. I said, Eldon, your mom called and she said it's getting too dark and that you are to stay here and spend the night and that she'll make sure she can fix you up in the morning. And he was fine with that. He was like, oh, okay. And he just calmed right back down. We had a snack. We did stuff, got him to bed. Everything went cool after that. But until I learned how to do that, I had no clue how to redirect him when he was having problems.
Yeah. Wow. I know as you were sharing too, I can only imagine the stress level where you mentioned that they had taken him after one of the situations to a geriatric psych ward and not knowing at the time that some of the responsibility on your family, some on the staff type of thing, or how to nicely meet in the middle. What is like, so something like that, I go back to what you don't know, you don't know. Are those types of things proactive measures? Can they be found in your book for people that are going through? And how much of that do you think you can be proactive about, not knowing kind of what's coming, but wanting to do everything in your power to make sure good decisions are being made for what you have control over?
Well, that's the great thing about knowledge is power, because if you have enough understanding going into it, it's easier to navigate. Think of it like having kids. When you have your first kid, you are so terrified you're going to kill your child, you're going to drop them, maim them, feed them wrong. They're going to have a fever at earache. You can't get them to calm down or make them feel good. So, and then by child number two, you've got most of the bumps and bruises smoothed over. By the time number three comes along, it's like, oh yeah, we got this, So it's kind of the same thing. It's like once you start recognizing and start learning it, if you start talking to people, or in my book, because I couldn't find a book that met me where I was, and so that's why I created the book the way I did, because I wanted something that had a table of contents where I could run my finger down the page, find the challenge of the day, turn to that page, and wandering. Do this, don't do this, take a daily photo, make sure that you look if he's right-handed, to the right side, because that's where they turn the most often, is the direction of their dominant hand. However, I knew that my dad didn't operate on that particular plane. So while most people will go in the direction of their dominant hand, he would randomly go wherever. So it didn't matter. I just had to know where to search, so that the first time he escaped, it wasn't his fault. I was working from home and I was on the phone. And so he saw me in there. He waved. I didn't even see him. He walked out the door to go work in the garden. And now we had a doctor's appointment coming up, so I had to get off the phone. I get up. I looked for my dad in his room getting ready to go, and he wasn't there. And I searched the whole house. He was not in the house. I went outside because I thought, okay, he's gone out to garden. I go the entire house. He is not there. Okay. I immediately panic. And what happens when you panic? Your mind freezes up. And I couldn't remember what he was wearing, even though he'd worn it for 3 days in a row. I did not remember what he was wearing. I felt like such a dolt. So I called 911, and I'm in a small town, and they're going, we have so many emergencies right now. We cannot help you. You have to spend at least 15 more minutes searching. So what I ended up doing is I went to all my neighbors and turned him out. And by the time I got to the third neighbor, I found him because he was in there. They had asked him to come over and help repair something, and he had the skills still to do it. He went over and fixed it. So, and then they were just chatting and, having a cup of tea and saying thank you. I mean, it was just, and then but you just don't know how it's going to end. And so that's when I started having to search, for all answers.
Yeah.
all of this is amazing to me, the different tips and techniques that you're sharing. And for a minute, Tracy, I just want to go back to the first story about the 6-bed home, group home, that had 2 staff members, and your dad was the only one that had mobility.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, if I was a person that had to look at that as an option for a parent or loved one, it seems that there would be key questions that we should be asking. I mean, otherwise we would be setting ourselves up for a potential problem. Do you have questions that you can suggest for families, whether it is that type of situation, or, what should they be asking or bringing the loved one home?
Ideally, you won't be in the situation where we were, because social services, because we didn't have all the documentation, would not allow us to take him home. So we had no control over that, because my sister had power of attorney, but she was still at work. I was on a day off, so I could go. I also didn't have the 𝗫𝗵𝗃 authorization, so they couldn't tell me about what was going on with my dad. So there was a few things that we had go wrong. So it's making sure that you have all your paperwork ahead of time, and then having that discussion, asking your family member when it gets to that point. And some people don't want to talk about it because they acknowledging that fear is very difficult. So, and a lot of people are terrified of dementia. Even if they have it, they don't know they have it, as you've already seen. And so it's knowing your options ahead of time, what's available to you. A group home is not someplace I would necessarily take my family member unless they were dying. So we ended up using a group home for my own mother, because there were no hospice beds available. And so she was in a really lovely group home at the end, and they took really good care of her. But with my dad, he was up, he was going, he was active, he could still joke around and carry on a conversation. You never knew he even had dementia. So it's knowing what's available, knowing the services that are available. Usually what happens, it comes like with us, with a disaster, something happens and somebody gets hospitalized, and then you only have a very short window to find them a place. And a lot of times, if they're not going into rehab, but they are being placed, social services will give you the first bed, whatever the first bed is, which is why he ended up in a group home. So understanding that places like a place for mom that you can call, and if you only have a short amount of time, because with my aunt, that happened to us also, where she was not allowed to go back to her home because she was showing signs of vascular dementia. She had had a fall, she'd had several heart attacks, and we actually hit the 911 cap. And if you don't know what that is, it's a monetary amount that is set by people that are frequent flyers of 911. So she would have a heart attack. She didn't want to bother anybody. And then she would wait too long, and then she'd call 911. And so for her, she equated that with feeling better. So she would always call 911 whenever she wasn't feeling good. And so, again, a monetary cap, it's different everywhere you go. So it depends on the size of the community. They said, we're done. We can't help you anymore. It won't make you feel better. You're done. So that was again a hard thing for us to deal with, because we only had 6 days to find a place for her to live. And we didn't know about because she was in a rehab facility. The minute you stop rehab, the Medicare clock ticks, and she would have been released 2 days earlier than the 7 days as a result of them stopping the physical therapy. And so they called us on a Saturday and said, you have to pick her up on Sunday. We are very fortunate that, because of our previous experience, we already knew that Washington state law and several other states say you cannot discharge a patient on a Sunday if the facility you're discharging them to does not have staff to accept them. And nobody had staff to accept on Sundays. So we were very lucky. We said, no, you have to hold them for another day. So if you don't know that, you are stuck.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. The stress, the stress that must come along with that. Yeah. Wow. How do you feel about, I know there are several communities that I've been in now that have designed the community to have the resident be able to go outside, even though it's a secure facility, and walk in circles. So in a sense, they can walk until their heart's content and be outdoors and have the sunshine and all the benefit of that. Do you feel that that would have been enough for your dad?
It would have been if, because he's very social, so he could have been walking around and stopping to talk to people, because that was his whole jam, was just, and other times he would have all this nervous energy and just go, 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 go. We were coming in I have two sisters. We were coming in and helping him walk, but it just, at the last facility, it wasn't enough. When we got him here, he worked his way up from 1 mile back to 5 miles walking. And so we also had a really lucky thing where we took him in for a drug interaction check based on one of my friends who's a medical practitioner. And she said she thinks there's too many drugs that he's on, and they're having bad interactions because of the things that his blood sugar was way too high, and we had all these problems. So I took it to the pharmacist. They said, oh, you need to take him off of 22 medications. So understand, he was on 38 medications by the time he exited the nursing facility, because nobody thought to look back and see if anything was interacting, if it wasn't working, and what it was doing to his body. When they took him off of that, he was only on then 14 medications to manage just his general health issues, because he had diabetes and a few other things. He bounced back like a flower on Miracle-Gro, and we could actually trust him in the morning, not in the afternoon when he starts sundowning, but in the morning, to go for walks by himself, which was fabulous for me, because then I could send him out, he could walk. Every one of the neighbors knew him because he stopped and socialized. So I always knew where he was. Except for that one time when he was at the neighbor's house. But I mean, so it was easier for me. And then I basically had group care in that instance. But in the evening, no, he could not do that by himself. But it was just getting the exercise. If we wore him out in the morning, he slept all night.
Yeah. Wow. I'm thinking too, there's something to be said, to your point, to have community involved, right? And be neighborly and be aware as a whole. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation for another day, but the importance of that, the ripple effects can be positive for the person, but also positive for you, not having to worry, having some free time, but just by people being neighborly. Yeah. And I love the idea that you talk about how he didn't lose his skill set when it came to, you've got me going in another direction of how many folks that have early onset dementia that might be in an assisted living community that can actually contribute to some of the things that they're dealing with staffing crises, and have someone feel productive, be productive. Just again, that, I'm going back to person-centered care or just looking at each unique individual for their strengths and so forth of what they offer. So yeah, that's amazing. I have a question for you. I know you have a lot of chapters in your book, and you have so many tips in there. What would you say are your number one and number two tips to people that are caring for a loved one in the home with dementia? And I know that's a tough question, but I'm just curious of an umbrella view.
So I think my two power chapters are preparing your home for dementia, making your home dementia friendly. And the other one is distraction techniques, because those are the two things that will carry you through moderate dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body, whatever it is. Those are the ones that are going to be your bread and butter. They go with the distraction techniques, how to set up the home so it's more empowering to them. Also about how to redirect them, how to take care of repetitive questions. Because one of the tools that I discovered was used in the hospital, and I reused it. I love this idea. It was a whiteboard, and we put his schedule on it for the day, so he always knew where he was going to be that day and what was going on. And then he would check his calendar and do kind of a checking behavior. And then when we started having repetitive questions, I would laugh that first time he asked me, because we were joking around, and I'd answer the question. When he asked me the second time, we would laugh about it, and we would talk about it again, and I would write it at the bottom of his board. The third time, I would pretend I was busy, or I might have actually been busy. He'd ask me the question. I'm going, "Oh, Dad, can you read that off the board for me? I can't I have to take care of this right this second or I'm going to have a problem. And he was really happy to be helpful. So he'd go over, he'd read it off the board and go, oh. And then he'd be all excited because he could answer his own question. And we had just empowered him. And so he didn't need to keep asking because he'd look at the board and go, oh. I was just like, I loved it. It was so cool. Now that doesn't mean it'll work with everybody, but you can train them because there's positive and negative emotional related memories with people with dementia. If you hurt their feelings, they will remember that for a long time. It can take up to 30 days to regain their trust. If you have something positive, they will remember that also. So you were talking about the strawberry ice cream. One of my friend's dads had Parkinson's dementia. He was in a skilled care facility, and my friend would take his dad a milkshake, a nutrition shake actually, every Friday just to make sure that he got enough nutrition in there. And it was a strawberry shake because that was his favorite shake. He did that for 6 months, and then one day he was running late from work. He didn't have time to run home to make the shake. He forgot to bring it with him, and his dad chewed him out. Where's my shake? They remember.
Oh, wow. That's so funny. I love it. I love it. Wow.
Great tips. Great tips. You mentioned earlier that he was on 38 medications. And in my mind, I always thought that the doctors would communicate with one another what the patient is taking, but I don't think that's the case anymore.
It's not well, and this was back in 2010. And what was happening is each facility had their own. It wasn't an on-staff doctor, but it was an on-call doctor that worked with them. And so what would happen is they would say, oh, okay, we're having this problem. These are the behaviors. This is his health. And they'd like fax back and forth. And then they say, okay, put him on this medication. Well, what was happening is they were stacking meds, but nobody was looking at them. And even when they were brought in, and we had the last one we went to actually had an on-staff pharmacist, and she never looked at the drugs for the interaction check, probably because she was too busy. It was a really huge facility, and she was the only pharmacist on staff. And so it was, I am guessing that's probably why. And if it wasn't for my friends who worked in medicine said, take this to the pharmacist, I would have never known. But when I was asking questions later of them, they were saying, well, each of these are for behaviors. So they were trying to calm him down, make him relax, make him more pliable, I guess you could say. And the drugs weren't playing nice together, and it was making him hyperactive, which that's not really what they wanted. So, and I get it. But yeah, he was much easier to handle after he was off all those drugs, because one of them was an off-label prescription, and it was an antipsychotic, and it's actually banned by the FDA to be used with someone with dementia. So they had given him, but before it was banned, they had given him that drug. It also, if you didn't have diabetes, it would give you diabetes. He already had diabetes, so he should have been dead from his diabetes because he was up in the 600 to 700 range for his blood sugars. So it was a big deal. Yeah, it was a really big deal.
Yeah. I know we hear now, typically older adults, 7 to 8 chronic conditions, 7 to 8 meds, maybe 10, which to me just still seems high. That's to me just a lot. And then you think you've got a person, if you put perspective, who likes to walk, you get physical benefit from that. I think you're releasing endorphins. There's got to be positive effect regardless of age or condition with that. So yeah, that's alarming. That just to me seems way too many meds. So I have a question for you. At any time, because here's where I'm going with this, your dad living with you in the home, did you eat certain meats where a knife would have to be used to cut the knife? And did you have your dad being able to use, just like you use regular silverware? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So the answer is yes, he did use a knife. I trusted him with the knife. Because he was exhibiting behaviors where it looked like he wasn't going to injure himself. So, and when he could no longer use a knife, he was self-feeding with his hands. So he just stopped using the utensils altogether and started eating. So I knew that's when to take it away. But I felt comfortable with him because I knew well enough from his behavior and observing him and stuff that he was okay with the knife, and I didn't have to worry about him cutting himself or anybody else. And so it wasn't for me. But you have to know your loved one. You have to know what they're like and about. But you can also pre-cut their food, and you can ask them. I mean, they want to participate. They want to feel needed and involved. And so just ask them, do you want me to cut up your meat for you? Because when we got to that point, he did. Now, my dad switched over to fish. He used to be a real big beef eater, and then he wanted fish at the end. So we did prawns and salmon and trout, whatever we could find. And of course, you don't need a knife for that. So he was just excited. And then
Yeah.
we took him to a sushi restaurant, and we had a big sushi boat, and he was just like going to town with that.
Yeah. Now, the reason I bring it up, there have been multiple conversations recently about, and it kind of, for me, ties back to what your dad said. I don't have the plague. I'm a human. I've got Alzheimer's. You hear things, right, wrong, or indifferent. You hear things about knives being taken away, or people with dementia that might want to do different activities, and people can be more guarded versus it's still a person. It's still a human being. Let's take a little bit of risk here to have them feel like a human being. And all of that value comes back, in my opinion, enormously, but of course, it depends on who that individual is, of course, and uniqueness and all that stuff. But I think it's important. I think the more typical normal daily activities of life that a person, the more joy and the more quality of life, I mean, it just stands to reason they're going to have. Whereas if it's kind of the same way with kids, right? If we constantly hold their hands because we're afraid they're going to fall, they're never going to learn how to walk. So I'm not saying you throw them to the wolves, but at some point, pull the hand back and let the child walk. And if they fall and get a bump, put a Band-Aid on it, so that type of thing. So, Susie, I could talk to Tracy all day long. Do you have any parting thoughts or any additional questions for Tracy that might help our viewers?
Well, I'm thinking your book is probably a tremendous resource for many people. Who did you write it for?
Well, the age range for the book is anyone 45 and above, and actually it can be younger, but that's the 45 is the age that most people start doing dementia caregiving. That doesn't discount the fact that there are millions of husbands and wives out there that have been, they're in 60s and 70s and 80s that are doing a bulk of the care also. But I made sure that it was at least for those that were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. Yeah.
And people, Tracy, can get it on Amazon and I think other places now too, right?
Yeah, it's available. It's in wide release, so you can get it on Amazon. You can get it Barnes and Noble, Target, Walmart. Both of those are online. You can also get through your favorite independent bookseller, and it's available at the library for those of you that can't afford to buy a book.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fantastic. Awesome. Thank you for all your tips. I mean, wow. I wish I had those tips when we needed them for our loved one, but I'm glad you're out there sharing the news that can help people navigate this season of their life.
Yeah, you're very special, Tracy. So we appreciate you coming back. Thank you. And yeah, definitely keep in touch. Like I say, maybe you'll be our third time guest, because I just could talk to you all day. It's so important. People just, they want help. They need help. So when you have a good resource, you want to make sure that the information gets out there. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Susie. We appreciate you.